Okay, well, I'm still way behind schedule with my content, but hopefully this week will turn out to be a slightly less disruptive week and I'll be able to get back onto a regular schedule. That said, there's a lot of important things that I'm working on in the background, so they are going to have to take priority for a lot of the week, or at least for the next couple of days. But I still aim to get a few live streams happening and to get a few videos out, well, hopefully to get my daily videos out. I'll still bump out the shorter videos on top just to try and give people a bit of extra content and also just to act as reminders of things that we've discussed in the past. Again, a huge thank you to everyone who has subscribed to my channel, everyone who interacts with my channel, and everyone who has done memberships or buy me a coffee or super thanks, super chat. You're all really helping me to keep this channel going, making a huge difference. Now, on that note, if you're someone who does enjoy my content and you're not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. It's free to subscribe and it does help my channel out immensely. And hitting like and leaving comments also make a huge difference in terms of helping my channel get out there into the algorithm. Now, Shenanigans did a great live stream this morning. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend going over and watching it. She just deals in some hard facts, which kudos to her. I think she's really coming into her own as a content creator, and it's definitely showing in this live stream that I was watching this morning. Admittedly, I've still got a little bit to go because it is a long live stream, but what I've seen so far, pretty good. If you're like me and you can only do small doses at a time, go and watch a bit and just see what you think and then keep going back for more. That said, I will be discussing some of the things that were brought up in that live stream in my live stream tomorrow morning, barring any sudden cancellations. Now I'm going to move on to this video because having spent a lot of the day giving myself a break, getting out of the house, just forgetting about all of this, it is getting kind of late into the evening and I would like to get this video out tonight. So this is something I've been wanting to discuss for a few days, but like I said, I've kind of been behind schedule. And this is taking a look at the different things that have been said by Daniel, Derwood and Anita with regards to Malaya allegedly doing a runner to the reserve. Now, I recently did do a video where I discussed Daniel's and Derwood's stories and kind of found a middle ground and suggested what I thought was quite a plausible explanation for what was going on there. But then now you have this Anita throwing in a new story which doesn't really fit with anything much at all. So I wanted to throw that into the mix and see what we come up with. I do want to make it quite clear before I start that I don't see any of these three people as being credible. Daniel and Derwood occasionally throw in a little tiny bits of truth. Anita, I think there's some truth in there, but to me she seems the least credible of the lot. So of course that's where the problems arise, because you have three liars who are trying to push a narrative. They're trying to push a narrative about the same event, but none of their narratives really match up. Now, like I said, I have done another video recently where I did the comparison between Derwood and Daniel with their narratives. So with theirs, I'm going to just not go so deeply into it, really just cover the key points again. I do recommend going back and watching that video, and I'll link that in the description. But I'm going to look at the key points with Derwood and Daniel and then move on to information that has come from Anita and why I think that is problematic, and then some more information that's come out from Shenanigans today. I should probably also mention before I jump in, for those of you who've mostly picked up on my channel in the warmer months, you may not have heard so much of that snoring noise in the background. That is my chihuahua Amira, and she takes up residence under my desk when I'm recording. So that's just part of my channel, really. So with all that out of the way, let's just jump in and start listening to some of this audio.
Supposed to be running towards the reservation right now. Now, let me think here for a second how we're going to do this. What the main reason I'm calling is that's going to break some things because she broke the CPS contract of being fully supervised there. And her mother was there and resisted her running, and she went against her mother and everybody and ran by herself. And it's a direct result. I told you people that I was going to go stir up the family, and I did today. And I believe a member of the family heard what I was saying when I was stirring shit up and notified Malaya, and Malaya broke and ran.
Now in this version, you have Malaya doing a runner. Cindy was there and tried to stop her. And he admits that he's the one that caused whatever the issue was. He says that he tried to stir things up, and he sounds quite proud of himself. Now the story that he's trying to convince us of is that Hayden was responsible for giving Malaya some sort of information that he overheard from Derwood, and that Malaya took off as a result of that. I have questions about that now. I have reservations about actually believing that, and I'll come to that later on in the video, because we know that Derwood has gone out of his way to try to discredit Hayley, Hayden and Cheryl, amongst others. So it seems to me that he decided to make Hayden a scapegoat here. Make it look like Hayden was in on it all, or unwittingly in on it all. Something that I noticed here that I hadn't noticed before when I've discussed this is that he says that Malaya broke the CPS contract of being fully supervised. And then she ran. I hadn't noticed the way that he has said that before, but it certainly made it sound that she was unsupervised before she ran. And we've heard this before, and I'll come back to this further on in the video.
Malaya is probably going to lose Meadow now because she broke the CPS contract by running. And I know because I was overheard by someone who I have suspicions on talking about this to another relative of mine. And I believe they picked up the phone and called Malaya and said the jig is up, and Malaya panicked and ran. That's what I think happened.
Okay.
And I did it on purpose. To shake things up.
So the more recent story we've had was that Meadow was taken immediately after Malaya did this alleged runner. And yet here, Derwood is saying on this live stream that she's likely to lose Meadow now. So this was the evening after this alleged runner that Malaya did, and based on what Derwood's saying here, it sounds like she still had Meadow at that time. And he's saying she broke the CPS contract by running. So again, he's establishing this notion of her just doing a runner with Meadow. Now, Derwood has done us a favour by giving us more audio, which makes it even easier for us to figure out what his tells are. So when he says here that he believes somebody overheard him and then contacted Malaya and said the jig is up, when he says that's what I think happened, that in Derwood speak is code for this is BS, this is actually not how it happened, but this is a convenient story, in my opinion. Now, each time he talks about stirring things up and leaking information to Malaya to trigger her to do something, he sounds quite gleeful about it, so I suspect that he is being truthful about that, and that he did have a hand in whatever happened on that particular day. And I think that it was in cahoots with at least one person, possibly more. And of course at the time, none of these content creators asked him, why would you feel the need to do this? Why would you feel the need to stir things up to the point where Malaya does a runner to the reserve, knowing that as a result of that she would lose custody of Meadow? We all know the answer to that now, and I've gone through that in depth in my previous video. But nobody thought to ask Derwood this, even though it seems to be one of the more obvious questions that probably should be asked.
I want to defend Meadow a little bit. So the statement on the run, I don't necessarily. She panicked and she left with the baby from Cindy's place, and she went to the reserve in Shubenacadie. I think she thought it was a wise move. Now,
so here's where he introduces the notion that actually Malaya panicked, and that is the reason why she took off to Henry and Connie's place. What is interesting about that is that he's already admitted that he basically, what was his word? Set the cat amongst the pigeons. So he intentionally said something that was going to be passed on to Malaya, allegedly, that was going to cause her to do a runner. And he adds that he thinks that she thought it was a wise move. So he's definitely telling us here that he orchestrated things in a way that was going to make Malaya panic, make her feel that she was somehow under threat by staying at Cindy's house, and that she needed to do a runner to the reserve because she thought that was a wise move. So again, the question arises, what was it that she was told? And why was it that she thought it was a wise move? What made her panic? No content creator actually thought to ask him this question. Possibly because he was just barreling so much with his narrative that you couldn't really get a chance to get a word in edgewise. But I just find it interesting that no one got a chance to ask this question, and we still don't really know. Well, even if this story is even a little bit truthful, we don't know what he's getting at here.
And her bailing today was another large indication to me, because I think she was informed very quickly that I stated a name. I inquired about a name, and I was eavesdropped on, and I dropped the name because I wanted to be eavesdropped on.
Right.
The person that was eavesdropping, I was very suspicious of being involved. And before I got back home, I got the phone call that Jesus Christ, Malaya had grabbed the baby, panicked, and took off. The only part of that I can't verify is that she went to the reserve in Shubenacadie, although that's where she screamed that she was running. And my relatives all believe that that's where she headed now, unless she changed her mind. And somebody had tried to call her to verify this, because one of the people I know called her, and when she recognized the voice, they could hear the car going, and they could hear the wind in the car. They knew she was traveling in a car, and she immediately hung up on them and shut her phone off. So that's the total of, I know for a fact she grabbed the baby and bailed in a hurry. And I would say 85% sure myself that she was heading for the reserve in Shubenacadie.
Now, in this retelling, he says that he name-dropped, and apparently name-dropping, whatever that name was allegedly what caused Malaya to panic, because whoever heard that name apparently thought it was worthy of ringing Malaya and telling her that Derwood had dropped this name, and that allegedly caused her to do a runner. But what is interesting here is that he then says, I got the phone call that Malaya had grabbed the baby and taken off. Now, this narrative from Derwood has always bothered me, because I've always felt that there were pieces missing here, bits of information that were being left out. Now, what he's told us here, I'm just going to break it down for you. Allegedly, he was at Paddy's place, and allegedly Hayden was there. And it was Hayden who allegedly overheard him mention a specific name to Paddy, which made Hayden think he needed to contact Malaya, give her a heads up, and then Malaya did a runner, and then someone rang him and said she's done a runner. Why is this problematic? First of all, in terms of him name-dropping with Paddy, if he'd have name-dropped and said something about Daniel, given what we know now, I think we can be pretty confident that actually Hayden wouldn't have rang Malaya, or he might have rang Malaya, but in all likelihood, Paddy probably would have rang the police if Derwood had suggested that Daniel was on his way over there. Because one of my original theories was that maybe Derwood suggested that Daniel was going to go over and take Meadow. But like I said, given what we know now, I doubt that Paddy would have just stood by and done nothing. I would imagine she would have rang the police and maybe organised for someone to go around to Cindy's place if Cindy wasn't there. If Cindy was there, then why would there be a panic? But the huge red flag for me, and something that I have tried to wrap my head around for ages, is him saying he got the phone call that Malaya had grabbed the baby and taken off. And again, I thought, well, could that be Daniel? Was it something that he'd lined up where he basically, was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop a name, cause Malaya to do a runner. You ring her when you know that, the time is right and let me know. But that didn't make sense to me because we know that, according to Daniel's account, and that is something that sounds quite believable, that as soon as Malaya realised it was him, she hung up on him, and also he claims she was already on the road. So that suggests to me that, for starters, it wasn't something about Daniel turning up that caused her to do a runner, but also that it wasn't Daniel who contacted Derwood and said she's on the run. Now, we know that from everything Derwood has said, it really doesn't sound like he has a particularly great relationship with Cindy. I think there's actually a bit of jealousy there. Maybe competition between Cindy and him for Paddy's attention. I don't know. But he certainly doesn't speak overly kindly of Cindy. He was quite happy to throw her under the bus. And if Malaya had done a runner and Cindy was going to call someone, especially if she knew that she was headed to the reserve, then she would either ring Henry or she would ring Paddy. Or she would have no reason to ring Derwood. He would be the last person on her mind. So that suggests there was a third party involved. Someone who was present and was able to give Derwood a heads up and say, hey, yeah, she's on the move. It certainly makes you wonder, doesn't it? And I will come back to that. And he does tend to double down on this here because he says somebody tried to call to verify and then one of the people that I know called her. So it sounds like he is essentially saying there were two people involved here. Now we know the part of that is Daniel calling her because the way he's told it matches Daniel's story. But at the same time, it sounds like somebody else gave him verification. It definitely sounds like there was a third person here whose role was to let Derwood know as soon as Malaya took off.
And have you spoken with Malaya since any of this has happened?
Yes, I did. I did one time.
How did that go?
Actually, there was twice. First time, when she was on the run with Meadow, fled to the reserve when she wasn't being supervised. Darren called me and said Malaya's unsupervised. So then I called Malaya's phone from my aunt's phone because I was at my uncle's at the time. Used my aunt's phone. I called Malaya's phone. Malaya picked up, and I could tell from the background that she was in a moving vehicle. So Darren was correct on that. And so then I called major crimes investigators and I said, Malaya's on the run with Meadow. And they said, there's nothing we can do, Daniel. You got to call CPS for that. Troy called CPS, but they were already closed. And it was actually Cindy, her own mother, which called CPS on Malaya, which had Meadow removed.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so
that's something new that the public probably doesn't know.
And what ended up resulting? What happened? Did CPS find her, pick her up? Obviously?
CPS went to her father's house along with RCMP, I do believe, and they actually took Meadow out of her care while she was at Henry's.
Now again, I've gone into this in far more depth in a previous video, so I will make sure I link that. But what is interesting here is that there's bits of his story that match Derwood's and there's bits that don't. So this is where we get introduced to the idea that Malaya was unsupervised. So Derwood's claiming Cindy was there. Now Daniel's claiming she was unsupervised and that she did a runner to the reserve. He claims that he rang her and conveniently he just happened to be at his aunt's place and rang her on that phone. In other words, he didn't want her to see who was ringing, so him and Logan teed it up that he would go around there and make the call from there. Because I do believe that Logan was in on all this as well, and I've discussed why in depth, but I do think it was this whole thing of Logan trying to get custody of Meadow. I think that was part of the plan, and this was part of the plan, if this is exactly how it went down. Now the difference we get here is that according to Daniel, that CPS turned up at the reserve and took Meadow from Henry's place. So the impression he's giving here is that they turned up straight away and took Meadow the same time that Malaya did the runner. He claims that he rang the RCMP and they said, oh, we can't do anything about it. You need to speak to CPS. He claims that he tried to get them, but it was after hours. But Cindy eventually rang them. Well, that doesn't make sense then, because if it was after hours and Cindy rang them, they wouldn't have turned up at the reserve straight after Malaya did a runner. But not only that, if it was after hours and he couldn't get through, why would it be any different for Cindy? So that part of the story really doesn't sit right at all. Now, you've heard the audio of Derwood, who was saying, well, after this happened, Logan was going to apply for custody of Meadow. What isn't explicitly stated in any of the audio, but you can see it in the chat section in Dolly Vision's live stream from 19th of July. I think it was June or July. What wasn't mentioned was that all this occurred the day before the first CPS hearing thing for Daniel, with him trying to get access to Meadow, which certainly makes it sound like it was a big setup. It was geared at trying to make sure that Malaya lost custody of Meadow and to try and get Logan custody of Meadow so that obviously Daniel could have free access. But when you put the stories together, you have Daniel claiming that Derwood rang him and said Malaya's unsupervised. You also have Derwood saying that he got the call about Malaya doing a runner to the reserve, which was when he apparently rang Daniel. So it certainly sounds like there's a third person involved, someone who was able to let them know, or let Darren know, that she was unsupervised. So someone who was keeping an eye on things at Malaya's end of things. Cindy and Wade aren't going to ring Derwood and say Malaya's unsupervised. And they're certainly not going to ring him and say she did a runner to the reserve. So there is something going on here. It sounds like a big setup if this is how it happened. And it definitely sounds like there is another person involved. Now I'm going to move on to some messages, so some comments in chat, some text messages, etc. Starting with things that you will have seen before, which are things that Daniel said around the time that all this happened, or at the time that all this happened, I should say. Now this was one of the messages to one of his girlfriends, and what I find interesting here is not so much the message itself, but him basically saying that he's going to do whatever it takes to bring her down. I believe him when he says here that he'll do whatever it takes to see her in prison, but I think that also shows us exactly where he would have been coming from in terms of trying to get Meadow off her. I think that was part of one of the goals in the early days. If he's willing to try and push a narrative to try and have Malaya take the rap for what I suspect he's responsible for, then yes. If he wants to get Meadow off Malaya, then, you know, nothing's going to stop him. Again, this really attests to his frame of mind at the time. Not so much about this Meadow story, but his frame of mind. So down the bottom here, he says her family has been saying effed up S to CPS. That's why I can't see Meadow. So for him, this is before that hearing where he was trying to get access to Meadow. His view of it all is that the reason he could see Meadow was because of Malaya's family, them saying things to CPS. So it certainly seems quite likely that he would have wanted to set Malaya up to make sure that she lost custody of Meadow. It's that weaponising children, which you see so often in relationships. And he would have done it out of spite. But not just out of spite, also because probably in his mind, he probably did think that if he did that, then Logan would be able to get custody and then he could bypass all this CPS stuff. Now this is from Dolly Vision. As you can see, the date was 19th of June, so I was right with my second guess earlier. You can see the title of the live stream if you want to go back and watch it, because there was a back and forth. Daniel was in the chat. Dolly was conversing with him while Daniel stayed in the chat. There's a few interesting comments here. So on the left-hand side, and I think when we see what he wrote on the other side, I think he made a mistake in terms of it was probably autocorrect, because he said, investigators are going to be passed at me already for this. This is him having already come into the chat and basically said, hey, you know what, Malaya's done a runner with Meadow. So his whole purpose of going into the chat on this evening was to tell everyone that he had a CPS thing the next day, and guess what, Malaya did a runner to the reserve. So I think when he says here on the left-hand side, sort of middle section here, investigators are going to be passed at me, I think he's trying to say they're going to be pissed. Because then, if you go on to the right-hand side, the second comment down, he says, I'm going to take heat for this. RCMP will be on my back. That is an admission from him that he was involved in this situation that occurred on that particular day of Malaya allegedly doing a runner. And then he goes on to add that he called her, she heard his voice and hung up. We've heard him say that to the turkey guy. But the thing that is crucial here is he says, I want Meadow, not Malaya. He's laid it out here quite clearly. His goal was to get Meadow off Malaya. So it seems that this was a plan that was hatched between Daniel and Derwood to try and get Meadow off Malaya. Their goal being to get Logan custody, because clearly Daniel realised that, well, if they're not allowing me access now, simply getting Meadow away from Malaya isn't going to get me custody. So he probably thought this was the way around it. Get Meadow removed from Malaya, get Logan to step in and say, hey, look at me, I'm a good mama, I've got 3 kids of my own, and I want to take custody of Meadow, which, you know, never going to happen. But I think they were dumb enough to think that was a possibility. So until recently, this was pretty much all the information we had when it comes to that alleged situation of Malaya doing a runner to the reserve. But then recently, we suddenly get this Anita pop up, and she's got a different story about all this. Now, there's so many versions from her story already, because it seems like she has spoken to dozens of people. I don't know what this woman does with the rest of her time, but it sounds like she was spending a lot of her time sitting and messaging people on her phone. So I'm going to go through some of the information that she was putting out with regards to this. A lot of it comes from Facebook, some of it comes from communicating with people. So there is a bit there where she's communicated with me before she ghosted me after I questioned her misinformation, where she said that Cindy and Wade had never been to the trailer, and I questioned that because, of course, Janie had said they had, And I had said, oh, well, does that mean Janie's lying? And end of conversation. This woman does not like you to question her. The moment you question her, she shuts you out. So with a lot of people talking to Anita behind the scenes, what happened was this post came up, and I can't even remember what the original post was, but it came up about Malaya doing a runner and all that sort of stuff. And then the questions started coming out, because by this stage, Anita had already begun sharing stories with multiple people. People were sharing the stories, the gossip was getting around, and people were getting confused because they were hearing different versions. So this is a conversation that occurred on Facebook. I had a look at it. I thought, this Anita woman is interesting. I'd like to hear a bit more. Contacted Belinda, and then I'll explain that when I get to that. So you have someone here, first of all, asking, is it confirmed that Malaya ran, or did she just take Meadow with her to visit a friend, which would still be against the requirements? I don't see why that would still be if she was supervised. Did she leave against Cindy's wishes, and could the person she went to serve as a supervisor? Could the person she went with serve as a supervisor? So this is going, clearly, this person has had one story already from Anita that sounds like Anita just took Meadow and Malaya to the reserve. But here, the story here is that she went to visit a friend. So already there's confusion. So then we get the first version. She wanted to see her grandma Connie, this is coming from Anita, and her dad. I took her there personally. Get your facts right. So this is the first instance of her jumping out and saying, I did this. You'll note this doesn't fit with the narratives that we've had from Derwood and Daniel, where they were claiming she did a runner and that she was unsupervised. Now we get further questions. So this Lily Jack comes in. Cindy also allowed for Malaya to take Meadow and run while Meadow was in Cindy's protection. The charges should be 2 times. So this Lily Jack has got it in for Malaya's entire family. So here he was trying to throw shade on Cindy as well and say, hey, Cindy should be charged as well for leaving Malaya unsupervised. And then this Anita jumps in again and says, wrong, I had Meadow and was approved. Wade and I both were with her and Cindy was there. This disgusts me. Lies. So straight up, she's been questioned and she's already throwing in, this is disgusting, this is lies. And this is people just trying to make sense of a story that's continually changing. So she's gone from saying she took her there personally to now that she had Meadow, she was approved by CPS, which is a story we've heard, and that Wade and her were both with her and Cindy was there. So in this instance, you have Meadow, her, Wade and Cindy all with Malaya. And I think what people were getting confused here is because they had been told that Malaya had to be supervised by Wade or Cindy, and now this Anita is saying, well, Wade and Cindy were there, but she still went to the reserve, and this is when they came and took Meadow away from her. So it doesn't make sense. There's no reason for CPS to just turn up and take Meadow away from her for just going for a drive if Cindy and Wade were there. Also, if, as this Anita claimed, she was a court-approved supervisor, because that would mean that Malaya was essentially supervised by 3 other people. So suddenly the whole story is just getting really confusing and really wrong. Now, if you've followed this Facebook page, like me, you probably believe that this Lily Jack is definitely someone connected with Daniel's side of the family. They popped up pretty much straight away when the case began, and they've been commenting ever since. And some of the things they put on there sound really, really dumb. Makes you think that maybe they've been tweaking and they get on and start posting. Sometimes they're just trying to stir up problems make people look at Malaya and her family and think they're guilty. So this person does a lot of playing around. But here they've again doubled down. Okay, how did Malaya take Meadow and make a run for it, or were you in the car with her? So Lily Jack is pushing because the original story was that Malaya did a runner, that Malaya took Meadow and did a runner. So he's trying to figure out how this Anita person has suddenly popped up on the scene and completely changed the narrative. And yeah, I was suspicious too. Straight up, this had me really curious, which is why I decided to message her, and I'll come back to that. So then we get the, I have a brand new Mercedes. And no, I was not in her car, because, you know, you wouldn't want to be in a scummy old 2017 Nissan if you're driving a fancy Mercedes. You know, this woman comes across as like she thinks she's better than them, I have to say, sorry. Not sure why I'm even answering to your stupidity, but I'm sick of lies and misinformed people. Well, people are confused here because her story is basically turning the previous given stories on their heads. People were trying to understand why it was an issue for Malaya to go visit Henry and Connie if she had supervision. Why is it suddenly that we are being introduced to the notion that Malaya didn't do a runner, but she had supervision, but CPS still came and took Meadow? It makes no sense. So this is where people were getting really confused, trying to question it, trying to clarify, and she was getting her back up. And then she says, no, she followed me. I had Meadow and Wade in my car. RCMP and CPS both were made aware we were going, and Chief Michelle. You people just were not there. The facts are facts. She simply wanted to see her family. Again, that makes no sense whatsoever on so many levels, and I have discussed this. I did a shorter video about it when I was just focusing on her, but why would she have Meadow in her car and have Malaya travelling in another car when Malaya would never put Meadow down usually? Also, clearly Malaya's car would have had a baby seat in it. And even if it was Anita's car and Cindy's car, Cindy's the grandmother, she would have had the baby seat in her car. Why would they take the baby seat out, put it into her I keep trying to say BMW, and I know people are going to come at me again, it's just my brain interchanges the two. But why would she need to transfer it into her Mercedes, take it out of the car that other people were going to be travelling the same way in? Like, it makes no sense. And then to say that they told RCMP and CPS and the chief that they were going to go visit Henry. Well, why? Why would RCMP care if Malaya was going to go visit her father, especially if she was being supervised? But for starters, even if she was unsupervised, it really wouldn't have been their business. And I do believe Daniel when he says that RCMP said to him, you have to call CPS. So it certainly makes me think that that happened, because why? Why would you need to contact RCMP and say, I'm going down for a drive to visit my father? That's just not, it doesn't happen in any case whatsoever. She wasn't named as a suspect. She wasn't under house arrest. She was free to come and go as she pleased. Sounds like the only limitations were that she needed to have someone supervising her with Meadow for some reason. Now, we still don't know if that is the truth, because that has only come directly from Daniel. So there's probably a little bit more to that story than what we're being told. But again, if she's supervised, why would CPS care? They're not going to turn around and say, you have to be supervised and you're not allowed to leave your house. That's infringing on someone's rights to tell them you're not allowed to leave your house. So, again, why? Why would they need to contact CPS? And why would they need to contact the chief? Just to say, hey, she wants to go visit her father. So, this story from the get-go made absolutely no sense whatsoever. But it piqued my interest. I was curious. So I sent Belinda a message and said, what do you know about this woman? What's the deal here? I'm thinking of messaging her. What's your knowledge of her? So Belinda pretty much gave her the all clear with me. She said she'd been speaking to her since the beginning of February and she thought that she was legitimate. She said she knows that she'd spoken to Shenanigans and told her some of what she had told Belinda. And then she said that she had made a statement to police and had said that she wasn't allowed to have any further communication with social media, which I find hilarious given what's happened this week. She has agreed. She does talk with me though, and I will keep it confidence so as not to jeopardise the investigation. She does stand by what she says. So here Belinda is actually sticking her neck out and vouching for this woman. This woman has convinced her that she's legitimate, and Belinda hasn't seen any warning signs, or maybe she just really needed someone to be sharing information that she thought was truthful, and maybe she just didn't stop to question what she was hearing. But she got the seal of approval from Belinda, so I thought, well, okay, I will try and contact this woman. Now, I just basically sent her a voice message to save time typing, because when you're typing on an itty-bitty phone, it's not really that itty-bitty, but it feels itty-bitty when you're used to typing on an iPad and stuff. So I sent her the message as a voice message. Her response was, for the integrity of the investigation, I can't speak openly about that. My response, basically shutting it down, thanks so long and thanks for all the fish. That's totally fine. Thank you so much for getting back to me. End of conversation. That's when she came out with, I will say, taking her to reserve was to make sure she would be safe and baby Meadow. She would have Connie, her grandmother Henry, and Michelle, the chief, and the support she needed, and the lawyer and the Micmac family services. So now the story that she's given me is different from what is online. Here it's all about her doing it for the safety of herself and Meadow, whereas before she said it was to go and visit Henry. So this story's now got about 20 million versions in terms of Malaya heading to the reserve from Cindy's place. Here on the right hand side, this is going way back to June when Belinda asked Malaya, why did you do it? And according to Malaya, she said that she was protecting Meadow from CPS, not from Daniel. I have questions about Malaya's truth here, but that's for another time. So we're getting an even different version here from Malaya, but it does make me question if maybe Daniel had told Derwood the name of the CPS worker, and that was the name that he dropped in front of Hayden, and maybe Malaya did do a runner because she thought CPS were on the way to take Meadow. But again, Malaya's not exactly the easiest person to trust either. We know that she's been pushing this innocence thing for the past 11 months, so why should we believe any of this now? And I mean, this is Belinda that she's talking to. If Belinda was asking if she was afraid of Daniel, then maybe that was delving into a territory that Malaya didn't want to discuss. Hence, she went with the easier version that came with no additional questions of saying she was protecting her from CPS. I don't think we can really hang our hat on this answer, is what I'm saying. So then this is the version that it appears that has been told to Belinda. Anita, Wade and Malaya went to the reserve. So no Cindy now. They went to Connie's, where CPS on both sides showed up along with the chief. So now it's not RCMP and one CPS and the chief turning up. It's both CPSs and the chief. And in this instance, Cindy was absent. So it seems that Anita has not remembered what version of the story she is telling people. So it certainly calls into question any of this part of the story. I'm still leaning towards some sort of setup from Daniel and Derwood. And the problem here is that we had Derwood in the moment saying that he believed Malaya was going to lose custody of Meadow. And here, the version that we're hearing from Belinda that's come from Anita is that they went to Connie's and then this whole posse turned up. Things just don't add up. I'm not going to address the rest of this comment right now. I'm saving that for another time. But the main thing here was the claim that only 3 of them went to the reserve and that CPS just turned up en masse with the chief for some reason. And in this instance, Cindy was absent. Okay, now this is a person who is a friend of Anita's. I'm not going to try and read all of this because it is really hard to read. But I'm going to go and skim through to some of the bits that I think are pertinent because they're things we need to look at. So first of all, lots of threatening me, telling me that basically Anita's all truthful and, yada yada yada. But what she says here is that Anita lived with Cindy, Wade, Malaya, Meadow and Hayden in Wentworth. We know Hayden did not live with them. Hayden was living with Paddy, with his girlfriend. So first up, the story that this woman's been given is, again, a wrong story. And then she says she helped a friend out to look after Meadow and help Malaya to get help through taking her to her father, grandmother, Indian reservation, Indian Brook to get help with housing, legal counsel and Meadow. I'm not sure why she needed help with Meadow if she had Cindy and Wade on hand to help. And then there's a lot of, you're slandering, yada, 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 this is all rotten, talk to the Maxwell family, they're a wonderful family, all that sort of stuff. But what she's claiming here is that Anita lived with them and that Hayden was living there at the same time. And this version that this woman's been told was that apparently, Anita is some saint who was taking her to the reservation to get help with housing and legal counsel and with Meadow. So at this point in time, I'm pretty much ready to throw out this entire version that comes from Anita because none of her versions match up, which makes me think that she was not there when Malaya went to the reserve. But why is she involving herself in this? And a comment that was made by Shenanigans today certainly made me question if maybe the person that Darren was talking to, the person who rang him and said Malaya's on the move, could have actually been this Anita, and that she was working with Daniel and Derwood, because her stories are way worse than Daniel's and Derwood's attempts at telling the stories, which to me says she's an even worse liar than them, and which takes me back to wanting to look more at Derwood's version of the story and Daniel's version of the story, because their stories do seem to connect, and when you put all the pieces together, it does seem that it was a setup, that they knew that Daniel had to go to CPS the following day. He was trying to just get access to Meadow. He had said he wanted Meadow, not Malaya, so clearly the goal was to take Meadow off Malaya. And they basically set things up so that Meadow would be removed. But it certainly sounds like there was a third person involved at Malaya's end of things, who was able to give him a heads up and say, yeah, Malaya's on the move. Given that this Anita is placing herself in the house at the very least, and allegedly in the vehicle when Malaya was doing a runner to the reserve, well, we know that Cindy and Wade aren't going to contact Derwood, so it seems that she's the only person left. So it certainly makes you question if she did have an involvement in this plan to get Meadow off Malaya. And of course, we've heard the stories that she's put out about Meadow in the last month, which certainly are meant to reflect back on Malaya in a bad way. And we know that they're still fighting out the whole custody access thing, etc. So it seems quite plausible that she's in on it with Derwood. And this is why he claims that she is such a credible person, just like he did with Janie. Now, this is another person who has apparently been communicating quite a bit with Anita. She has just appeared out of the blue. I've never seen her in connection with the case up until about a week ago. Somebody had a look and they said that she joined the Facebook group on the 6th of March. And certainly I would believe that because I've not seen her anywhere prior to this. But it seems that she has been communicating with Anita, just like everybody else behind the scenes. This Anita who is, giving exclusive information to just one person only and isn't allowed to talk to anyone, but has spoken to half the world by the sounds of it. And this was in response to one of my recent videos. Maybe the part you've missed out on is Anita was the babysitter. When Malaya left the trailer and went to her mother, CPS said she couldn't be alone with the baby when her mother was at work. Anita, a childhood friend of Wade's and a friend of Cindy's, volunteered to babysit while Cindy was at work. She was there for 2 weeks. She's legit, please don't dismiss her. She's not connected to Darren Geddes. I seriously wonder now, I do think she may have connections with Dingbat. So moving on from this, we've had some information come out today from Shenanigans. Now, there's a lot of information she's not sharing, but she's clarified a lot of things here. So I think this is important to look at in terms of this story regarding Malaya and Meadow.
All I'm going to say is with regards to what happened with Meadow, none of it is as it seems. So, and when the time is right,
like I said, she's come a long way with her channel in the last couple of months. But I kind of disagree here in terms of saying, well, none of this information is quite right, but it's not the time to share what is the truth. Because that just means that people are still going to speculate and people are still going to question what the story is. You could put all these rumours to rest simply by giving a Cliff Notes version. You don't have to go into all the nitty-gritty, but you could at least do like an overview of exactly what happened without adding too much of the personal stuff in, and just put this whole story to bed once and for all. Now, I recognise, of course, that the story that would come from Shenanigans is coming from Malaya's side of the family, so again, you'd probably have to look at all the stories together to try and find that middle road, because obviously even coming from Malaya's family, there's going to be variations that may be designed to take a bit of spotlight off Malaya, perhaps. Normally, I hate the saying, there's three sides to the story, yours, theirs, and the truth, because to me that is basically saying everyone's a liar, which I don't believe is the case. But in this case, it does feel that way. So I think it would just be adding another puzzle piece as opposed to getting the complete story. Because, like I said, I think there would still be some alterations based on who they're trying to look after in terms of how the story is told.
It'll all be out there. The truth is somewhere out there. There are elements of truth in everyone's story. And put it all together, take out the bullshit, the truth is there. However, when you have people, certain people, not everyone, only telling 20% of the truth in a story, it gets harder and harder to weed out the facts from the shit.
Okay, I actually think she's being a bit generous here, saying that people are only saying 20% of the story. I would probably put it down to maybe 10%, possibly less for some of them. Because certainly there are so many different versions of this story. This Anita woman has probably given about 10 different versions on her own. So, yeah, it makes it really hard to figure out what the truth is. But again, I think either don't say that you know what the truth is. Just keep it to yourself, as opposed to coming online and telling everyone, essentially hinting that you know what the truth is, because that's what she's telling us here. She's saying she knows what the truth is. She's not going to tell us. Well, either just keep it to yourself and don't even bother saying that you know what the truth is, or at least give some indication of what the truth is. So this is where I do disagree. Like I said, I think she's doing a fantastic job, but I'm not a fan of this gatekeeping from content creators doing the, I've got information, I'm not going to tell you. And obviously this is a pattern that is amongst several creators. So I'm not faulting her. She is a new content creator. She's seen other content creators do this, so she probably believes it's okay. To me, it's one or the other. Either you just don't mention that you have this information at all, and you just play dumb, or you give a Cliff Notes version, you just give as much information as you have to give without going into all the really intimate details.
So to recap, I have been told by members of Malaya's family that Anita watched Meadow one time for a couple of hours. That she is unreliable and to question her family members if we want to know about her. So seeing as I've spent more time with Anita alone than Anita spent with Meadow alone, you can make of that what you will. No, she was not CPS approved or appointed. And if Cheryl's still here, she can tell you that as well. She babysat one time for a couple of hours.
So a huge shout out to Shenanigans for clearing that up, because I think a lot of people were just getting confused, frustrated by the many different stories that were coming from this Anita woman. So no, she did not live with Cindy and Wade. She was not there for 2 weeks. she babysat for 2 hours on one particular occasion. And I can't help wondering if that one occasion was when Malaya went to visit Henry. And maybe that's why Derwood knew that Malaya was unsupervised, because they had trusted Anita to look after Meadow so that Malaya could go visit her father, and Anita took advantage of that, rang Derwood and set things in place. That is pure speculation, but I just find it really interesting that she has inserted herself into that particular part of the story. And what we're hearing here is that she babysat for 2 hours. If she babysat for 2 hours, that would suggest that Cindy and Wade were not there at the time. So this story about them all going in on a merry little drive in a little convoy of 2 cars, with her leading the way in her brand new Mercedes, sounds like that's just a load of BS. So I'm still leaning towards this being a setup. It all happened the day before Daniel had to go to CPS to try and get access to Meadow. It all happened before they're trying to get Logan custody of Meadow. So it certainly makes you question Anita's allegiances and if she was involved in setting Malaya up to do a runner to the reserve. Did Malaya do a run to the reserve, or is the story very different from that? The thing is, I think the main person who's talking with shenanigans is Cheryl, and while I would consider her to be more credible than this Anita, she's not going to come out with outright lies. I do think that she is going to be a little bit creative with the truth if it tends to shine the spotlight away from Malaya a bit. So it would make sense for those people who are closest to Malaya to want to put to bed this story of Malaya doing a runner to the reserve, because it does shine a not so great light on Malaya. So without hearing this other version of the story, I think it becomes really hard to know what's going on here. I think the only thing that we could really put money on here is that the 3 people who have given this story are all verified liars. So how are we supposed to get to the bottom of it? Do we try to get to the bottom of it? Or do we just go, let's just move on from this, we've looked at it, we've acknowledged the situation, let's just put it aside until such time, or if we get more information about the situation that might clarify some things. Now, I have to admit, I hate these videos where I get to the end and I haven't come up with a solid answer for you. I like to be able to look at things logically and critically and come up with what seems like the most logical explanation. Here, I don't have the most logical explanation, and that is because of the number of lies over this situation. I still lean towards this being a setup to make Malaya lose custody of Meadow, but there's still a lot of holes that need to be filled in here, in my opinion. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know what you're thinking about all this, because certainly it's raising more questions than it's answering now, I think. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Help me to grow my channel some more. Also, please hit that like button. Help me get this video out there into the algorithm. There's been issues with the algorithm over the last couple of days that have meant that some of my videos have just been kind of sitting there and not being put out there to be seen. So you can help me get my videos back out there, getting seen by people, by hitting that like button and by leaving a comment or even multiple comments, which helps even more below. If you are new, I will just add that as much as I try to answer everyone's comments, there's only so many hours in the day. That said, there's a lot of wonderful people in this community who love having conversations in the comment section of my videos. So even if I don't get a chance to answer your comments, there's going to be people that will acknowledge your comments and share their opinions, share their perspectives, etc. So that just adds to what's happening here in terms of the discussion, and I love seeing it when that happens. So please do leave a comment below, and I will certainly be reading them all and answering as many as I possibly can. So on that note, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.